Welcome to the Perfect 100, the podcast for BNI members who want to maximize their membership, deepen their impact, and grow their business through intentional networking. I'm your host, Tammy Zurak, a CliftonStrengths coach, longtime BNI leader, and one of the few members worldwide to maintain a perfect Power of One score. Each week, we'll explore the habits, mindsets, and everyday strategies of BNI members who are turning their membership into momentum. Hello, and welcome back to the Perfect 100 podcast. Today's guest is a retired full-time preacher who took his knack for financial consulting along with his creative flair and started a business about a year and a half ago as a bookkeeper. He's affectionately called Dr. Lange in our chapter. He is a member of our chapter. I want to welcome Daniel to the podcast. Hey, Daniel.
Hello, hello.
So the Dr. Lange thing, I'm not sure where that came from. It's funny if you're in our chapter, it's funny because our president always refers to Daniel. Daniel is our secretary treasurer, which is not a big surprise based on the fact that he's a bookkeeper, right? But did I miss how that generated?
I asked our president about that, Mr. Jonathan. I call him the Don, Jonathan. He's our leader, right now. And I asked him about it one time, and he just said, I got that doctor look, but I don't know about that because when people look at me, as soon as they say that, oh, there's a doctor in the room, and they see me, they say, nope, he's not a doctor. So,
We'll lovingly keep the title for the podcast. So,
yeah.
all right. So we're going to dive a little deeper. Tell us a little bit tell us your seat. Obviously, I've already said you're a bookkeeper, the seat that you hold, but tell us how long have you been in BNI, and give us a little bit about how long you've been in the chapter. I know, but tell everybody else.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been a BNI member since last year, the May 2024, and I currently am serving as the Secretary Treasurer for the East Memphis chapter. And so I hold the bookkeeping seat, and I own Lange Bookkeeping. I'm the owner, solopreneur, everything. So, and then I offer outsourced bookkeeping services for churches, nonprofits, and small
Well, we're going to
businesses.
get your 45
Yeah,
seconds so you can
yeah.
tell us more about that. And rumor has it you might be the Secretary Treasurer next year. I don't know if that's true or not.
I'm pretty sure that's a shoo-in. There's no
Yeah.
discussion about a new one. So,
Perfect. All right. So go ahead and give us your 45 second when you're ready.
okay. Hi, I'm Daniel Lange with Lange Bookkeeping, securing your financial integrity. I specialize in outsourced bookkeeping for small businesses, churches, and nonprofits. And so, from reconciling your books to processing payroll and producing clean financials, I make everything line up behind the scenes so you can really focus on what matters most. My ask is if someone is that is overwhelmed, owns their business, wearing a lot of caps, behind on their books, and just wants reliable monthly financials, I would love an introduction.
All right. 10 minutes to spare even. All right. I mean,
Yeah.
10 minutes, 10 seconds. 10 minutes would be a lot. All right. So since this is the Perfect 100, let's go ahead and dive right into your Power of One and see where you're at. I already know, but let's show, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the report on the screen. So I won't belabor the point in reading everything because you have a 95, which is almost the Perfect 100, but very, very close. Not quite there, but awesome, which is about as close as you can be. The only area that you are not green in is CEUs,
That's the
which
drop, isn't it?
which is funny to me because just one more podcast and you would have had it. um, Tell us how. I know I'm going to guess based on your strengths that you have a process. So how have you consistently stayed in the green? I know you've pretty much been in the green as long as I can remember. So what puts you into the green on the regular?
Well, yeah, it's really funny that you say I'm down on CEUs because that's the one that I think last time we spoke and you kind of showed me my power of one, I was at the highest level. So,
Right.
you know, um, I'm definitely a learner naturally, and that's very easy for me. So that I think it has helped me a lot in the green, even if I'm down a little bit right now. But naturally, I like to soak things in and learn as much as I can. Especially last year starting a new business and just joining BNI. Immediately I wanted to know as much as I possibly could. So I think the CEUs have helped me stay consistent and also, as far as what helps me stay consistent is, um, doing the one-to-ones. I keep a schedule, I keep structure in my business, and maybe we'll talk more about that later. But I like getting into the one-to-ones and getting to really know someone and start building that trust over time. I'm very patient, so I can play the long game, and I really appreciate those deeper relationships.
Okay. So was there something that, whether it was just how you are personally or something that triggered you to say, I really should be trying to strive to be, 95 or, in the green, the higher end of the green, which is where I typically see you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, internally, naturally, I work best in a very focused kind of setting. And so, for the one-to-ones, for example, that allows me to be really engaged and focused. Same with the CEUs, I can really stay focused and engaged on what's in front of me. That's one of the unique things about BNI is there's multiple venues, settings for us to improve and grow our business. So the weekly meeting is just one part of that, and so a lot is going on in that, and that's one of those, I don't know if I excel as much as I do with the one-to-ones or the CEUs with that. I kind of have to go home after that and then absorb and think about what happened, you know. So I think that, but that, that's what's good about BNI is there's not just one setting where you can, grow your business. There's multiple venues
Right.
available to you.
Well, and I'm interested to hear because you started BNI, you'd never been in BNI until you started your business, which I said earlier was about a year and a half ago. And the chapter started in May of a year ago in May. So, but you're serving in leadership. You're on the executive leadership team. And I know that a lot of people, we're in the season now. It's the summertime where we're looking to October to start, fresh with new leadership, and you served right away. So you didn't have a choice, really. Well, you always have a choice, but everybody. What I meant was everybody in a new chapter, somebody has to do it, whether they're new or not. So it's a little bit different when you're starting a brand new chapter that everybody might be new, right, to their
Right.
role. But is there? Would you say to somebody who is new to BNI that they can't serve or shouldn't serve, or how have you found that serving right off the bat?
No, I would say serve, because it gets you involved. I really benefited from coming into a new chapter as someone who was new. So I didn't feel as intimidated, even though, as I got to know everybody, there were people in there that been in BNI a long time, and so we're used to this. But still, just being part of that newness of it all just really seemed to fit. And so stepping into that role just seemed, just like, all of us were doing that and
Right,
had to do that anyway. So,
right.
but even if you're in a chapter maybe that's been around a long time or something, still someone had to be at where you were at one point, and you just have to make those jumps, and it teaches you a lot.
Yeah, you learn when you have to stand in front of people and talk about stuff, you you tend to have to sometimes learn it more, right? You understand it better because you don't want to look silly standing in front of your peers. So you generally get a deeper understanding. That's why they say if you don't know something, teach it, because
Yes.
that's a good way to learn because you're going to have to absorb what you're trying to teach to somebody. So that's a good thing. All right, let's roll over to your Palms report. So there were 26 total meetings, of which you were present for 25. You have zero absences because you had a managed in there. Referrals given inside 7, referrals given outside 27. referrals received inside 5, referrals received outside 19, visitors 6, one-to-ones 30, and thank you for closed business given $8,735, and CEUs 23. So in 26 weeks, 23, that's the one little, you only needed probably, the percentage is 0.92 for that. You were almost at 100%, and you would have probably, and again, to remind everybody, it's a 6-month window. So it's a steady, you've got to keep it rolling over that 6-week period. You only missed a couple of weeks where you didn't have one, and you had a couple of weeks where you had two. You just missed it by a little bit. But which category, looking at what's on the screen there, which do you think has had the most impact to your business?
So, I mean, I would probably go back to the one-to-ones. That's allowed me to really build and establish my network. You really choose who you want to network with, and who you want to be part of that closer, that power team, so to speak. Everyone is really, once you step into that chapter, everyone becomes part of your network, but then you have to build those relationships, and really you can only keep so many close, really close to you. And so, that has allowed me to just really benefit. I think the most from it. I mean, the CEUs have been very helpful too, though, the education process, and learning a lot from Ivan Meisner. I admire just his work ethic, and his thoughts on a lot of things. So, and others as well who are part of that. The whole BNI corporate, has a lot of good ideas behind it that you can build and integrate into your business, and they all work.
Yeah, even as somebody who's been around in BNI for a very long time, I have high ideation, and that for me is, I sometimes just need to hear somebody else talking about something that gets my juices flowing, so to speak. It gets the brain ticking, and the brainstorming pops up, and I've got a whole bunch of, or I remember things I've forgotten, which is often. So the older I get, the more I forgot. So I enjoy listening to reading, whether it's reading or listening. I like to listen to Audible when I listen to books, and because I could just squeeze that in better in my schedule. But I love all of that for that. Now I'm curious, do you take these reports, the Power of One, the Palms report, are those personal benchmarks for you, or is that more a condition of leadership that you feel like you should be there, or what does that look like in terms of the reports for you?
Yeah, I mean, the leadership, you have to be an example. I mean, since I've been part of the leadership, we've had a number of new people coming in, and so, right away, you kind of become that person that people are going to be looking to, that you were just there, not just months ago, and didn't know anything. And so, that's the leadership is part of that, but I think a bigger part of that is the personal benchmarks that you're trying to achieve, because I haven't really found anything in BNI that I've said, that's not really important. That's not helpful. Each of the structures that are in place are things that you say, yeah, those are things I need to do. I need to be visiting one to one. I need to be educating myself. I need to be part of these weekly meets, where I'm interacting and meeting new people, and continuing my relationships with people that are already there. So all of that is, I think you want all of those parts to be part of your business development and growth.
Right. Well, and you're also, because again, I know you, and I'm also in the local chamber. You're in a leadership role in the chamber. Was that a deliberate kind of situation where you showed up and said, "This is really, I want to contribute in that way," or how did that go?
I've read a lot of leadership books before, and you just made me think about this. Leaders are not people really who make themselves leaders. They're people that are chosen, um, and people that they come alongside and they say, we want you to, we'd love for you to serve in this position, and and then you make the decision: do I have the time? Can I commit to it? And so on and so forth. So I kind of got brought into the role as time went on. Same thing with BNI. I was asked maybe prodded even a little bit, and the
Right?
same thing with the barber chamber, same thing, I was prodded probably a little bit, and even got, well, it's a longer story, but now I'm serving as the president there, at least for now, and so yeah, you just kind of get brought into that position by making yourself, available and just meeting those qualities of leadership, I think.
Right. Awesome. So let's shift gears a little bit. Because I'm in your chapter, I have a little bit different observation, I guess, in terms of, if somebody wasn't in my chapter, I wouldn't be able to hear these things. But you've been very intentional in your 45 seconds that we do in our chapter, asking to connect to a CPA. What have you noticed in terms of results for that? You've had kind of a campaign, I would say, of looking for a CPA.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I'm playing the long game, and I've been consistently now asking for, to to find a CPA that's independent, that's going to round out our chapter well and round out my business. It's very important, in fact, to my business, for several reasons. So, um, I have already, I had a sit down with a lunch meet with a CPA that one of the members knew almost immediately. So I'm already starting to see the fruit of that. I know that this effort, this campaign, as you call it, is probably not going to be over right away. It's going to take a
Uh-oh.
little while. Yeah, I'll be on that one for a while, but I know that the rewards are going to be high once we get the right person in. So yeah, it's been good. It's been good. It's a little bit of a challenge to me right now because I have to do some digging and searching to find the right people. It's not just as easy as going down a list and saying, okay, this name, this name. I have to, but once we get that person, we find that person, it's really going to be a benefit to all of us, and especially myself.
Yeah, it's interesting you say you have to go down the list. We'll talk about that when we get to your strengths. I think that there's some tie in there, which will make obvious sense. What if you could you imagine that somebody in the room really wanted to help you, really wanted to refer you, but they didn't know any CPAs? What kind of ask would you say would make it easier for them to help you today if they didn't know a CPA?
Yeah, if they didn't know, I'm always on the hunt for small business owners that need help with their bookkeeping, that are overwhelmed, like I mentioned my 45 second there, and they can always help me out by helping me connect with people in my power sphere, which
That's
is,
fair.
yes, and so payroll providers, CPAs, financial advisors, maybe fractional CFOs that are working with small businesses and giving them financial advice and strategy. You know, um, the really the world is kind of my ocean when it comes to bookkeeping. In the small business world, everyone needs to keep the books.
Yeah, I think that, and one of the reasons I wanted to ask the question is if you if you've ever been to a chapter where not everyone, a lot of the people tend to say have the same ask every week. Eventually, it's kind of like if you watch TV and the same commercial comes on frequently. After a while, you may not hear that commercial as well as you did the first time because you've heard it and you're like, okay, I don't like, I don't know, whatever the product might be. If it's a TV commercial, I'm not into that. It's not my thing. So every time it comes on, I just tune out. So some things to think about as you're moving forward from a strategic standpoint, because that's my number one thing, is to look at different ways to get your ends, to met, so to speak. The ends to means to the end is asking in the commercial. But and you never know, because our chapter tends to have a lot of visitors. So you
Hmm.
might actually say it the day that somebody knows somebody that's a visitor and you get that great connection. But also the bigger, portion of the room are people that have heard that already and do want to help you. So anybody who's listening to this, be mindful that asking for different things often, or interspersing, changing it up, can often get you sometimes the thing you weren't expecting, from a strategic standpoint. Join the Art Academy in Memphis. Master the skills needed to create stunning, realistic oil paintings. With expert instruction, you'll refine your craft. Enroll today at artacademyofmemphis.com. So let's go into, because we're talking about strengths. Let's look at your strengths. And Daniel has taken the full 34, but I'll stop at blah. I will start with the top 5. So Daniel's number 1 is analytical. You search for reasons and causes. You have the ability to think about all of the factors that might affect a situation. So we kind of talked a minute ago about, you're going to get that list and you're going to check it twice or 3 times or 4 times. Number
Right.
2 is discipline. And this is new. No one so far on the podcast has had discipline. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But discipline is you enjoy routine and structure. Your world is best described by the order you create. Number 3 is responsibility. You take psychological ownership of what you say you will do. You're committed to stable values such as honesty and loyalty. Can't think of any 2 better things that I'd want in a bookkeeper than both of those last 2 things. Number 4 is focus. You can take direction, follow through, and make the connections necessary to stay on track. You prioritize, then act. And number 5 is achiever. You work hard and possess a great deal of stamina. You take immense satisfaction in being busy and productive. We'll talk a minute about discipline, which is your number 3. It's oftentimes, because nobody's heard, well, we haven't discussed discipline here. It's about order. It's about, I wrote down some words: systems, organization, precision, detail oriented. I don't know if I said structure. Does that tell us more how that plays out for you?
In a big way, I mean, it's a big part of how I run my business. I know what time I'm going to start, what time I'm going to end. I know how much time I'm going to dedicate to each of the parts, and I know how much I need to be. I look at all the different parts of my business that I need to be focused on, and I try to build structure immediately, to make sure that I'm hitting all of those things. So it's a weekly challenge, though, and sometimes that's the problem with being structured is every single week you're never going to hit that strict structure perfectly, and it's going to annoy you a little bit sometimes, but it really goes a long ways. And once you realize that, it really works to your benefit. To mine anyway, it works great.
Yeah, and each of us to our own, right? Is each of us has our own thing, and we can put the full 34 up. So Daniel has provided us with his full 34 report, and so to add depth to the top 5, I won't give the definitions of each of the things, but the number 6 is context, number 7 is consistency, number 8 is relator, number 9 is learner, and number 10 is command. So you can start to, at least I can, see the things that you already mentioned. Command is something that, well, tell me how command plays for you.
Yeah, command, is what helps me speak clearly, speak confidently, and that's what helps me build trust ultimately, with clients and networking partners. So having a very strong and clear command, which is also kind of part of focus too, that really works well, and it's important to me. That's how I want someone to communicate to me. I want someone to be, commanding, clear, confident, and that speaks well to me. So it's natural for me to want to speak that as well to others.
Yeah, and you have that sort of quiet confidence, again, kind of because I know you. You don't have a struggle, and I think maybe from your previous, life essentially, is that standing in front of a group is not a challenge for you, and and I use the words creative. I think that you bring an interesting twist to things sometimes that the average bear doesn't. So that I can see that command, kind of come up when you are standing in front of a room and trying to get people to follow along with what you're, trying to accomplish. When you think about your full 34, or let's just look at your top 10, what do you feel like is a superpower that you didn't give yourself enough credit for before you saw your report?
that I didn't give myself enough credit
Yeah.
for.
Yeah. Yeah, because I like to call
Yeah,
them superpowers, the anything in your top 10 really, the top 5 for sure, but really the top 10, when you have the fuller picture, can become those are the ones you're in all day. And some of them, if you only get your top 5, you're missing obviously 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the 6, 7, 8 can be very, very close to each other. So I've had guests on the podcast before who said, I really didn't I feel like I do this, and in addition to whatever the report said, then I feel like I do this is probably in their top 10. They just can't see it. So are there any superpowers that, you once you got the report, you were like, you know what? Okay, okay, I can see that. I should give myself credit for that.
sure, yeah, and it's funny because we just talked about command, but I feel like that's the one that I do, internally, because I'm very analytical. I find myself always questioning what I'm saying, second guessing myself, especially after I've said something. I used to joke with my wife because back in my previous life, as you mentioned, preaching sermons, teaching classes, the worst time was not coming up to it and leading up to it. I always felt very confident if I was prepared and I knew what I was going to say, what I wanted to say, and I was commanding in the moment too, as well. But it was the time right immediately after where I would sweat bullets and say, okay, did I say everything right? Did I say everything I wanted to? Same thing with my 45 seconds, it's the after, did I say that right? But when I'm in the moment, I can take that command, but it's that analytical part. But so, maybe I need to take more credit for that. And I've had others tell me that as well, Dan, once you older mentors of mine, that have said, once you've said it, don't think about it anymore. It's
Right.
done.
Right. Yeah, I have my analytical is number 12, and I feel that what you're saying is, and I think maybe a little bit of us, all of us do that, but some people might just move on, right? But I definitely have that thinking it through after the fact kind of situation. And I have high command, but I have command in my top 5. And command for me looks a little different for me, it's helping others take to get done what they need to get done, meaning I've always been the one in the room when something was going not so well that somebody would come to because they were afraid to raise their hand and say, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. It's not going well. And nobody else will say anything to the higher ups. And often, because I work corporate for a long time, nobody's willing to say anything, but I'm the one that will, and so everybody recognizing that, if just tell Tammy, she'll tell everybody, is because I'm not afraid to take that risk. But when you look at your strengths, your top set of things, especially discipline, helps people avoid risk, right? Is your number, your superpower is to create something for someone or yourself that is avoiding risk for them. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I would say that's true. And I think there's some parts of internally again that kind of help correspond to one another. Maybe you do even in reaction to. So, my analytical side of everything requires me to really be disciplined so that I know that I'm doing it correctly, and that I'm not having to second guess myself as much. So
Right.
it's almost trying to compensate, and as I work on that, I probably get a lot better at that.
Yeah, and you've got context too is number 6. So do you find yourself looking back over what's already occurred to avoid things from happening again?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's
Yeah, and I have futuristic. Your futuristic's 22. Mine's in my top. Well, mine's number 6. So, some of us look ahead and, find the way forward. And some of us look back and avoid we don't want to repeat the sins of the past, so to speak. And you need both. You need somebody, if you have a team of people or you want to hire somebody for your business that can support you in your business, it's good to have both of those things, especially if you're one and they're the other. Right? That's a good thing. Were there any strengths they felt a little too true, like they were calling you out?
felt a little too true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the analytical definitely calls me out, the discipline calls me out, the tunnel vision, the focus, that calls me out,
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the relator side of me, it definitely that's a major part of me. I I care about if whether or not I'm relating to people and if I'm connecting. That's very important to me, which is kind of a unique thing in my field because I feel like, and maybe they're going down a different road, another road, but there's a lot in my field when it comes to accounting. Maybe some accountants, and I love accountants and everything, but I actually feel sometimes like in my field I'm a different bird because a lot of accountants that I know are very non-relating. They're very good with the books and be on the computer keyboard, but
Yes.
not always engaged with people and
Yes.
everything. And so yeah, it's just kind of a unique circumstance for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel that also because I have relators my number too. So, while I have all the kind of strategy and influencing relators, and you and I share that relators are only relationship building in the top 10. So, but that's pretty cool because relator likes to go deep with people. So it's a different relationship. It's not sort of I go in a room and I make everybody my friend. I want to get to know you specifically and understand what's important to you, which for me, I like that because I guess that's what I like to do. So, so I appreciate that. Have any of your strengths shown up in weird places or unexpected places that you didn't expect them, that you noticed now that you're kind of thinking about them, whether that's at home or, something you do outside of, it might be BNI or, something outside of what you do for work?
Yeah, strengths that maybe if I understand your question right, maybe underused or
Well, maybe that you didn't recognize it might be, when I was thinking about discipline, I have not given my parents the assessment, but I'm going to guess that discipline is one of my dad's top 10. It took me back to when I was a kid. We would be assigned chores, and those chores they didn't just need to be done, they needed to be done a certain way. And if they weren't done a certain way, then there were repercussions of that. You don't sweep this way, you sweep this way. Which I'm like, I'm just sweeping. I don't know. But it was very important that it be done, from this way to this way to, whatever. That's kind of what I mean, is it showed up for you. It doesn't have to be discipline, but any of them showed up in other places that you were like, okay, now I see that.
well, yeah, seeing it in other places and that it's interesting because sometimes the context is always changing and some parts of my life maybe I bring other things out more. For example, I know when to be commanding and I know when to be submissive and following, the lead of someone else, which is kind of my discipline structure side of me. So, I can definitely see but for me, the Clifton strengths more or less really brought out what it helped identify what was there, maybe that I already knew was there, but now I got to see it and I got to see it analyzed and put together, and it was really neat how it all kind of aligned. And nod my head and I say, yeah, that's me, that's
That's
that.
me. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the most common thing I hear is, "Yep, that's me." That guy, I don't know how they do it, but they got me.
yeah.
Um, so you spend a lot of time building relationships, and and obviously with Relator in your top 10, that's an important thing for you. But you've been in different, as we mentioned earlier, you're in the chamber, you're in BNI. So maybe now that but from your previous life, you had to build relationships as well. How have you seen, or what did you used to believe about building relationships before you had your own business that you no longer think is true?
Mm. Well, um, when it comes to building relationships, I feel like it's the world that I was in before has just kind of naturally come into the next world, and so it's just kind of strengthened my beliefs about things like building relationships and seeing the benefits of that. Um, so I don't know if it's really contradicted anything that I didn't believe previously. It's really just enhanced and strengthened that, and I've used that to kind of platform myself into continuing,
Sure.
that journey. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
well, and life is a journey, right? Is I think that a lot of us end up, and if you're in BNI now, we do definitely have some younger people who are starting out, and I can think of several people who are in their 20s that started a business, understood the value when they got into BNI, and they have really built a strong business based on BNI, but that isn't the case for everyone. A lot of people life's a journey, so you pick up all the things along the way and they roll into what you're supposed to do. You may or may not have figured that out until I always tell my stepson, who's going to be 27 soon. We just had a long conversation over the weekend about what's next, and he's in the military, so he doesn't have full control over what is next. He only has he can provide some sort of boundaries, I guess, around I would like to do this or that, but there's no guarantee. It's, you serve the need of the military. But I think that you never necessarily have it all figured out, right? But you think you should.
right, yeah.
He's 27. He's like, I should know this, that, and the other, but you just really don't. And I think that's an interesting thing that over time we all, but when you look at CliftonStrengths is no matter what you're doing, you're applying that special set of gifts to the thing that's in front of you at the moment. And for me, it's always I'm meant to learn something from whatever it is, right? Have you
Right,
found that
right.
to be the case?
Yeah, I mean, and you can, even though there's certain items at the bottom of that list, futuristic is kind of bottom,
Mm-hmm.
of my list. There's some things down there where you can say, if you don't apply these at all, you're going to be in trouble. And that probably is something that, I learned a lot of life lessons just being in ministry for 15 years. And so, one of the things that I think I came into uh, within that service was, okay, I'm going to preach the word of God, and it doesn't matter what people think. That's that. It doesn't matter. That this is the word of God. This is all that matters. And then over time, I had to learn that. Well, thinking about how people are going to receive things, and maybe think about things, and being more empathetic on the other side of things before afterwards, that can really go a long ways. And so that was something I learned during ministry, and then I've brought into here. It's just as important now. Even it's very important as you're building your business to be thinking some futuristic. How's someone going to receive this? How are they going to receive you when you say these things? And
Right.
I've been in those one-to-ones where someone said, I don't care what people think, and I was
Yeah.
like, that's your problem. You don't care
Right.
what, you know.
That
So
might be a problem. Yes.
yes.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because that does permeate in a lot of places, right? It isn't just it's social media, it's chapters, it's life in general. But because of who we are individually, we look at whatever's in front of us through the lens of what our experiences are and what our strengths are. So that I don't care what anyone thinks can be successful for some people, but generally, the kind of organization that we are in as BNI. It matters because everybody is evaluating whether or not they'll send your client if I'm going to send you my good client, I'm going to decide based on what I can see, and sometimes that's a report, sometimes it's whether or not you're in the room when the meeting starts or you've left before it's ended. All the things that we track are designed to create an overall persona, if you will, of how you're going to be in your business. So it does matter, unless it doesn't matter to you that you're not going to get the referrals. Everything you do matters. So, all right. Looking at, kind of because you have a unique blend of talents like we all do, is there any small habit, maybe daily or weekly, that you do that has helped you stay top of mind with people or build trust with people that you can share with us?
Staying ahead in a world driven by technology is key. At Wisdom Integrators, we don't just solve problems, we create opportunities. Wisdom Integrators, connecting your world, solving your problems.
I think staying consistent and dependable, um, available is really the key word that's coming to mind for me because people, I learned in ministry this as well. It's all about people and Bible. It's all about people and God. Those are the two things that matter the most. And so bringing that over into the business world, it's the same. It's putting people first. Um, that's who we're serving in our businesses and our work. And so, if I'm getting a call, and I say, "Oh, I'm busy with this task,"
Right.
that can be hard. That can be difficult, and we do need to protect our structure to some degree. We don't necessarily want some people just taking over, our
Yes.
our businesses, but at the same time we have to remember too that's what we're in this for. We're in this to serve and to help. And so sometimes we've got to get out of that comfort. For me, the structure and time and scheduling is a comfort zone, but I've taught myself early on, even before I came into the business world, that putting people first is really what counts. And so
Right. Yeah, and I subscribe to that as well. I suspect that because responsibility is your number three, that plays well for you.
mhm.
That's part of what you do. And actually, the one of the what's the word I'm looking for? The blind spots for responsibility can be taking on too many things, right? Is not protecting your time. And I'm also, my responsibility I was looking is 13, so it's kind of follows up right behind the strengths. Is I can over task myself with letting, getting things for other people. I'm always available. So it becomes that balance. It's a good thing, but it can also become a bad thing if you don't set those boundaries, which, kind of going back to your discipline is saying, okay, here's as much as I can do right now. Otherwise, you can't deliver the type of service or whatever you're trying to give to people that you need to. Um, this is a little bit changing the gears. Have you ever received a referral that came from completely outside your industry and it surprised you? I know you've only been here for a year and a half, but have you gotten any oddball referrals that really kind of where you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I came into this really wanting to help churches, and then I kind of decided, okay, I'm going to go more, even more general nonprofits. And then I realized I really need to go way outside, because even though that's a place that I want to focus in on, I now realize that there's a lot of these businesses, business owners that, they're ready for this market, and they need assistance, they need help. So, that I've quickly opened myself up in a much more general way, even though I might still have this long-term goal of wanting to work more specifically with churches. But, so in that process, I've connected with restaurants, I've connected with, you know, um, trades, lots of trades, HVACs and plumbers and things of that sort. And, I don't know if there's any like really oddball ones out there, but there's definitely I did meet once a commercial what were they? They were commercial like drone company, and so commercial photography, and so then they fly these little drones around, and I was kind of able to just kind of give them some assistance with that, but yeah, there are some interesting industries that come into our BNI meetings,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
they all
you
need
never
bookkeeping. So
Yeah, you never know who someone knows, and it kind of almost goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Is if you focus, I'll give an example. I can think of a whole bunch of mortgage people and closing attorneys whose number one ask every week is realtor, right? Without fail. And if you only ever ask for a realtor, you're only ever going to get a realtor, right? You're never going to get the what about this one or that one, thinking outside that sort of boxes, so to speak, is I have to kind of be, because that unexpected one, which is maybe why I asked the question, right? Is that unexpected, drone flyer person is going to be maybe a great source that you wouldn't have thought of. And, not that you're going for, I'm looking for companies that do that specifically, but sometimes getting outside the window of always this one thing
yeah.
can give you more opportunities, because everybody against maybe tunes out after a while if I always ask the same thing every time. So it's good to kind of spread that out occasionally and think about that. It's that one time I look somebody specific up in a company that I think nobody's ever going to know that. And I ask in the meeting, hey, I'm looking for someone at this company, that company. And then 3 people raise their hand like, oh yeah, I know somebody, right? It's always, it never ceases to surprise me when I ask for something odd that I get it. And, but the asking is the first instigator of that issue.
Well,
All
that's
right.
what's happened with the CPAs. So I don't know if you noticed these last couple of weeks, but someone all of a sudden will say, "Yeah, I know that person," or "Hey, that office is in my building." So,
Yes, 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 for sure. So I've been doing this thing where the last guest on the podcast asked a question for you, and I'll have you leave one for the next one. So the last guest left this question: can you tell us a story about the best referral you've ever received?
the best referral that I've ever received. Yeah, uh, when I came into BNI, there was someone in our chapter that immediately kind of came up to me and said, "Hey, we can work together, we can partner together," and so that pretty much brought me in. I said, "Well, okay, if there's someone here that can bring me in, that can partner with me," and so since that time, I work in the financial world, so I've quickly began. To understand that I'm really in the long game with this. I have to build relationships. I have to build trust. I haven't received a lot of referrals in BNI, but I have built my network out quite a bit. Um, and then here, I've been about a year now and a couple months, and so now I'm actually just now, I think, starting to get some
Yes,
referrals.
yes,
So you know, I, uh, I did have a referral to a plumber, and actually, even though it wasn't a large client, I think that was probably one of my favorite because they came to me with kind of a new upstart, a couple starting out, didn't know a lot about QuickBooks or anything, or even about just growing their business profit, the profitability of their business. So that was kind of exciting because I was able to teach them a lot of things, and once they were able to see their numbers, I think it gave them a lot of confidence because they didn't even know what their profit margin should have been in their industry, and I was able to
right,
kind of with the books, by tracking your finances and organizing them, you can you have the data available to you now, where now you can dig in and say, okay, is this where I'm supposed to be? And so that's really been one of my, even though it wasn't a huge client or anything like that, I think it was definitely one of my favorites since I've been in here because it connected with me, someone that is new and growing, and I feel like, I always like to say, your success will be my success as well. So if I can help you be successful in turn as your business grows, then my workload's going to grow, and that's a good thing for me too. So
right.
I like that. I really enjoyed connecting with someone that starting small, and now I'm starting to see them progress and grow, and my bookkeeping is helping them with that growth.
That's awesome. Yeah, you said a couple of things in there. The first one that kind of hit my head was the I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, as a business coach, a lot of entrepreneurs don't look at their finances, right? That's the last thing on the list is I'm just going to do all these other things, and the money and the structure of the money and the spending and all those things, they don't recognize how much they're outputting, or they're just not looking at it, and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and they have, and that starts to become a burden because a burden they don't even know about that because they haven't looked at that. And then the other thing you said was, you're a year and a couple of months in, and you're now just starting to sort of feel the fruit of the labor that you've put in thus far. And that's also very common is, a lot of people only join for a year, and depending on their industry, some industries can be quicker than others. But when you're talking about money, or, in my case, coaching a business, some of those things take a little, the sales cycle, so to speak, is a little bit longer because there's a lot longer trust. It's a lot more to prove, or integrating things into people's businesses that support their growth. often is a sequence of events, right? Is they start with trying to do it on their own, and then little by little things change, and maybe they get an uptick, but it's not a straight uphill climb. It's a very stair step and sometimes down step, up step, down step kind of situation. So I love that you brought both of those things up, because it's very normal for the kinds of people that are in BNI. So I appreciate that. What's one thing that you're doing that's upcoming that's pushing you out of your comfort zone, whether it's in business or personal growth as you move forward?
Well, I am taking some business coaching here starting this Friday with a certain someone, and
What?
yeah.
Who would that be? I'm pointing at myself if you're not watching us.
uh, So that's going to be good. Yeah, because you're talking about well, the same is true for me, not financially. That was the first thing I looked at.
Right.
But the business side of things coming in as, from a previous life, the total change in some respects. I've never really sat down to establish my business foundation and strategy. Actually, it's funny. I was just telling my wife the other day. I was talking to a business owner. He's been in it like 40 years or so, and he's in financials. And I asked him, while we were sitting down eating, I asked him, "What's the one piece of advice you would give to me?" He's older, and a business owner, and he said, "Well, do you have your one-page business plan written out?" And embarrassingly, I said, "No, I don't,
Yeah.
I don't have that. I've been in the hustle, I know what I wanted to do. I'm a groundbreaker, right? So I got into it. I looked at this and I said, oh, I want to do this,
Yeah.
and I need to start providing for my family, and I need to make this happen. So I hustle, and I never sat down. So yeah, that's certain someone that I'm going to be doing business coaching with.
That
That's
would
coming
be
up.
me. Yay. So I printed this off because I didn't know if it would come up, but I definitely am hearing in what you're saying there. I'm holding up Daniel's page 21 of his Clifton Strengths report. There are blocks that speak to your themes, and Daniel's number one theme is executing, right? So executing, now you have it's 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 number of your strengths are all in executing. And then in strategic thinking, you have 1, 6, and 9. In relationship building, you have 8, and influencing, you have 10. Now it has all of them on there, but if you're on YouTube, and if you're on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe right now. But if you see the bolded, that it's not surprising that you would, let's go and get it. Let's just do it, right? Let's just start it and make it happen, and work out the systems, and let's execute on the things,
Right.
because that is the bulk of where your top 10 sit. So it is not even a little bit surprising. But that's the cool thing about recognizing, and you took this assessment before you and I knew each other. So somewhere along the line you said, and I didn't ask you that story actually, why you took it, around that. I don't know if there's anything significant you want to tell me about why, but it gave you information, or tell me, I guess, go ahead and tell me, is what, why did you take it, and what did it tell you at the time?
Well, actually, recently I finally finished my bachelor's of I kind of majored in biblical studies, of course, and that was something I started years ago. So in that process, that was just one of the things. Actually, one of the professors wanted us all to do in class was to take that Clifton Strengths assessment, and I didn't realize, how valuable it was, especially
Right.
until meeting you. So now I see even more how valuable it is, and it's been really good to bring that back, out of the closet, and bring that to the forefront, and start using that more.
Yeah, that's I love that actually. I don't know why I didn't ask you that before, but it's interesting because it does come up often, and we talked with Matt Carter from Works. It was in a previous episode recently, and he works with college age kids, or he was teaching, at that, and they were taking it then, and for various reasons, a lot of organizations want you to have the information, but what you do with it is not necessarily what they teach, right? They give you kind of the, here's your stuff, and it looks good, and it's like, yep, that you read it and you're like, yep, that's me, and then you tuck it away, as you said, in the closet. You leave it in there, and then one day somebody like me goes, okay, what does it actually mean?
Yes.
And there's
Good
value
prompt.
in executing, actually what you can do with what you have. So I appreciate you bringing that
Yeah.
up. So
Yeah, and
good.
what's kind of interesting too about in the ministry world, there was a generation before, maybe a couple even, where I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift now, where before it was like, okay, we have this image, this identity, and if you're weak in anything or you're not meeting this certain part, we want to bring you up and we want to, build all these weaknesses up. Now it seems like we're shifting a little bit, and even in the school that I was attending, it's shifting where it's like, no, wait a minute, we all have differences, and now we need to appreciate what those differences are and what those strengths are, and capitalize on those strengths.
Yes. Yeah, that's well, and it's driven by the millennials, believe it or not. That is a shift, that is a cultural shift. Gallup owns CliftonStrengths, and the Gallup organization's been doing workplace surveys forever. And that is, I have data. If anybody's interested, reach out to me and I can send you to the right sources. But the data now is there's been a cultural shift in how things are accomplished at work, and that is from the generation I grew up in, the same, where we used to, you would have your employee review, and it was maybe they give you a couple things you did well, but it largely would focus on what you're not doing so well, and making sure you shored up that sort of deficiency. And that isn't how millennials work. They have created a paradigm shift in how work will be done. They want to be coached, not managed. They want to have value inside and outside work. They don't want to work all the time. Like my generation is like, we just always work. Or people that have achiever, we always work, because that's just who we are. But that it was a requirement, it's just you work, and that they want work-life balance, and they want, and if your company, if you're listening to this and you employ millennials, then you're already feeling that. They want to shift the way how all things in work go. So, and I'm glad to hear that they're shifting. Universities are shifting, and they're adapting, because otherwise we're going to be not prepared for the continued change that is fast coming. So.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Daniel. It's great to see everybody. Well, I guess I'm not saying you all, but great to have you all here listening. And I'll remind you one more time, I am striving to have 1,000 people subscribe on the YouTube channel. So if you don't care if you listen to this on YouTube or whatever podcast medium you like to listen to, go over to YouTube and subscribe, because that will help me as a BNI member. That will support me. I appreciate that. And thank you all for being here. See you next time on The Perfect 100. Thanks for listening to The Perfect 100. If today's episode sparked a new idea or inspired you to show up differently in your chapter, share it with your team, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. And if you're curious about your own CliftonStrengths and how to bring out the best in yourself or your chapter or your business, head to TammyZurak.com to learn more about building your superpowers into everything you do. Keep showing up, keep connecting, and keep building your perfect 100.